Okay, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar about the COVID-19 impact on cellular IoT. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. Basically, just to quickly introduce what this webinar is about. We have, Kaleido Intelligence have produced a white paper covering, really just to examine what the impact of the current pandemic is going to have on cellular IoT. Obviously, there are a lot of factors that are really transformative in how we live and work right now. And one of those things is how, for us to look at, is how that's going to impact business and cellular IoT in particular moving forward. Quick note for attendees, as I mentioned just now, we have produced a white paper, but all attendees will receive both a copy of the white paper and today's presentation after the event. Another piece of housekeeping is that, please do feel free to pass any questions you have for the Q&A section at the end of the webinar into the chat, and hopefully we can address those at the end of the webinar. Okay, so without further ado, let's dive in. So today's agenda will be myself representing Kaleido Intelligence, really presenting some of the findings of the white paper. So what is the renewed business case that we're seeing for cellular IoT? I will then pass on to Gregory Gundelfinger, who is the CEO of Telna, who will talk a little bit about how the complexity for cellular IoT has now been reduced, which in turn increases the business case for cellular IoT. He will then pass on to Marco Biefaltz. Marco, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly there. Who will give us some insight on behalf of Core Wireless, specifically to the healthcare market vertical, who in turn will then pass to Thomas Fuchs, who is the CEO of Arkia. He'll give us some insight into how Arkia views the mobility side of cellular IoT. And then we'll close out with John Candish, representing SAP, who will talk about how the supply chain issues that we've seen over the course of this pandemic can potentially be addressed through cellular IoT. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A, so without further ado, I will press on. Okay, so my name is Stefan Sorrell. I'm the Chief of Research here at Kaleido Intelligence, who obviously are a research company covering all things roaming in the cellular landscape, as well as IoT in particular. Okay, so really to kick off, we need to look at some of the immediate impacts that we've seen from COVID-19. I am sure the majority of you are listening to this webinar from the comfort of your homes, or certainly a far greater percentage of you are doing so than perhaps you would have been before the pandemic. So what we've really seen is that more than 3 billion individuals have been impacted by not only lockdowns, but also social distancing rules, essentially government-handed mandates to avoid unnecessary physical proximity where possible. We've also seen tremendous efforts from governments around the world to, certainly the expression here in the UK is to flatten the curve, so reduce the potential peak of the number of infections resulting from the virus in order not to overwhelm healthcare services and in turn lead to an exacerbation of the death rate. Now, these two factors, so the fact that a huge number of people have been forced to work at home, and also have to consider how to reduce the number of potential infections has led to what we've seen over the last month or two is really constrained business activity. Now, that could be the result of, on the one hand, staff sickness, which we've seen, for example, through London's tube service. We've also seen lower workplace attendance, obviously on account of work from home regulation and so on. But we've also seen that there have been bottlenecks in the supply chain. So, for example, medical supply bottlenecks through suppliers originating in India and China, for example. So there's tremendous pressure on businesses all over the world as a result of this virus. Now, another thing to consider, and this is interesting that the WHO actually made a statement this morning saying that really we may never see the end of COVID-19. And in that respect, I think we can certainly say that further lockdowns are possible in future. And the most likely scenario, absent of any vaccine, is that we'll see repetitive relaxation and re-implementation of lockdown, social distancing measures. And in that sense, what does that mean for businesses? Well, it means that risk planning to mitigate the impacts of these, it has become essential. So let's look at what's happened to mobility over the past couple of months. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see Kaleido Intelligence's forecasts for international travel. So the green line there represents our projection that was developed in December 2019, and the red line represents our projection that was developed in April of this year. Now you can clearly see that there's a tremendous downlift in international travel. So at the moment, we're looking at some 48% decline in international travel in 2020. We'll obviously have a look at these figures again in the next quarter and see whether they need updating. But one thing is for sure, we're going to see a prolonged level of reduced international travel because of the virus. On a more local level, if you have a look at the right, so there is Google's own weekly analysis of mobility. So I've chosen the USA as an example here. So what we've seen on a local level is also a tremendous decrease in mobility around the area. So a 47% decrease in the number of people commuting to work. This really ties in to the concept of remote. So before the pandemic, you may have had remote devices that were easily accessible or relatively easily accessible. This may no longer be the case. So really, to emphasize the word remote certainly has a new meaning. When we look at how businesses are managing today, so on the one hand, I've mentioned work from home. There are upsides, certainly. So, for example, in 2015, Stanford University released a study that found that the company investigated had a 13% rise in employee efficiency. And meanwhile, they were able to save some $2,000 per employee from reduced rental costs for their offices over the 2 years that the study was conducted. So what does that mean? It means that in many cases, obviously not all, because some businesses don't function that way, but in many cases, we're going to see a prolonged increase in work from home environments for employees. I think the inertia that was there in businesses before, for example, in the banking industry, has been shattered in some instances. In other aspects, how are we going to travel around the local area once the lockdown restrictions are lifted? Now there we can look at how China has developed. So in that context, we can see that there's been a 120 to 180% rise in bike share volume. So that's been reported by bike share providers such as Hello Bike and Didi Bike in comparison to the before the onset of coronavirus. So essentially what that means is that people are less inclined now to use public transport. They prefer to use solutions, connected solutions that are in place in order to protect themselves and protect other citizens from being infected. Final point to make here really is that, as I mentioned briefly earlier, I think social distancing is something that is certainly going to be required at least into the medium term. Now that means that fewer congregations of people will be allowed into places, and that includes offices and work environments. And that really leads us to the conclusion that will demand new approaches into how business continuity is addressed. And really, it will drive the business case into connected assets to make sure things are running. And really, one key point there is that while IoT is certainly there to provide that support, it's important to note that cellular IoT in particular will be fundamental for many of the use cases. And we'll have a look why in some forthcoming slides. Key questions that businesses are going to be asking, and indeed governments as well, when we look at how business continuity can be assured. So really the first question is how can I reduce asset costs overheads? So for example, in the hospitality industry, keeping the lights on or off, for example, energy consumption down. Now that is clearly achieved through IoT. How can I position the business for the future? How can I keep things running while there are staff shortages, while there's spikes or shifts in supply and demand and so on? Well, that's achieved through data, and the data is supplied through IoT connected devices. In parallel, businesses and governments alike are going to be asking how can citizens be kept safe? How can economic damage be mitigated? And that's really about how to reduce the healthcare burden and the need for strict lockdowns. The only way to do that really is to ensure via data that healthcare compliance is met, that outbreaks are contained, and as we've seen over and over through government reporting around the world, that relies heavily on data. Now, if you have a look on the right there, to the right, sorry, of the slide, we've seen how in the past some companies have already addressed some of these questions. So, for example, Pizza Hut has experimented with robotic servers. Now, that may help reduce the burden on physical employees, social distancing aspects within a restaurant environment. Meanwhile, a company called IMS Evolve have saved one of their retail customers $2.9 million by automating lighting schedules. And that can apply not only to the retail environment, but also to other businesses as well. Meanwhile, China has continually had a significant problem in addressing healthcare burden, particularly in large cities where patients will come in from satellite towns or villages. Now they've developed so-called cloud hospitals, which will provide telemedical services in a more remote environment, but give them access to the quality healthcare of these top hospitals at the same time. Looking at retail in particular, as we've seen, I mean, that is one of the industries that has been at the same, both hard hit and at the same time seen a tremendous demand. So, for example, when we look at that, there's a study conducted by Kantar back in March 2020, which found that actually, while all those pictures of toilet paper and so on were doing the rounds on social media, they found that stockpiling actually only occurred in 3 to 6% of cases. Now, how can they address this in future? Well, that can be done through improvements in their own supply chain. They can look at data insights to monitor real-time demand. while at the same time you could potentially implement technologies such as shop floor or warehouse robotics to improve the efficiency of actual products from central warehouses or indeed in stores themselves. Meanwhile, we've seen in Germany that card payments have been on the increase, and of those increases, over 50% of those payments are now contactless because of the reduction in cash use. So what we'll see there is a tremendous increase in POS terminal demand, contactless POS in particular, which is traditionally supported by cellular technology. Meanwhile, the FAO has previously reported that 14% of the world's food supply is lost each year before it reaches stores because of poor storage, spoilage, and so on. So what does that mean for retail? It means implementing things like condition monitoring for perishables to reduce waste. So we built the business case as to why IoT is needed and how it can be implemented. But really the question is, why is cellular going to be so important? So some points to make here are, as I've mentioned, we're all working from home right now, but what happens if the broadband goes down? We need a stable connection. We need a reliable connection. And that can be achieved by something such as SD-WAN, where connectivity failover is supplied by a cellular connection. Secondly, we know very well that cellular has been very well standardized. It's highly reliable. Really, when businesses look towards ensuring business continuity, they must know that their devices are going to connect. And thanks to 3GPP, that can be ensured by cellular technology. And finally, really when you implement IoT, we've talked about security over and over the last few years, but as we increase the number of devices, it becomes even more important. And cellular is an important part of ensuring that devices are secure, thanks to licensed airwaves and remote lifecycle management tools to ensure that devices are kept as secure as possible. Just to close out then, we have made a forecast in regard to how we see cellular IoT being impacted by COVID-19. Obviously, this is done on a scenario basis. So if you have a look at the chart there on the left-hand side, this is our forecast that was developed back in December 2019. So close to 4 billion connections, cellular connections for IoT by 2025. What we could see potentially in a high-impact scenario is over 11 billion connections, cellular connections to specify. I mean, that's really dependent on how appetite for technology, how capability to address that technology, investment, and so on are addressed by various governments around the world. But I think what we'll see is that certainly from our discussions with key players in the industry is that already there's been an increase in demand to ensure that this business continuity is meant to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. And because, as I've mentioned, we'll most likely see the impact of this virus last a long time, I think that in turn will lead to a tremendous increase in the number of cellular IoT connections. Just a quick point here, if you'd like more detail into the methodology of this particular forecast, please have a look at the white paper, which is distributed after this webinar. And of course, feel free to ask us at Kaleido Intelligence any questions directly, should you have any. So without further ado, I will now introduce Gregory Gundelfinger, who is the CEO of CELLULAR, and he is going to talk about the issue of how to address complexity within the IoT environment. Okay, so over to you, Greg.
This is great news. Thank you, Kaleido, for this very relevant report. This is clearly going to be an inflection point for cellular IoT. As identified in this report, the complexity of cellular IoT has been greatly reduced by the GSMA standardization of the eSIM. The module landscape has also become far more competitive, both in terms of pricing and technology, thereby making cellular IoT deployments across multiple regions simpler and more affordable. For mobile network operators, system integrators, and enterprises, and OEMs, this means that the hardware required for cellular IoT is now able to support global deployments all on a single SKU. The question is, how do you manage all these devices globally? This is the new challenge that needs to be addressed by the industry. As all these devices are deployed globally, how do you streamline the management and switch EURCC profiles? Currently, cellular IoT is where the bulk of M2M traffic sits. There was a time when IoT roaming was grey traffic, but this has now changed. And IoT traffic has become one of the most important points of negotiations between mobile network operators. This cellular IoT roaming solution has been embraced by the industry as it enables a single pane of glass billing for the customer, as it enables the operators to retain the customer even as devices go outside their network. However, you cannot rely on roaming for long-term IoT deployment, as these agreements are negotiated annually and can be cancelled at any time. There could also be contractual obligations between operators that limit the amount of IoT traffic that can be sent transparently. In addition, there are countries that forbid IoT roaming and make localization or the use of local profiles mandatory. Telnet has created a solution that enables mobile network operators to retain their customers and create the same experience as cellular IoT roaming, but with a big difference. It localizes the EURCC to enable transparent, long-term, sustainable IoT connectivity. We do this by utilizing affiliate roaming and local profiles. Let me describe these two concepts to you. Affiliate roaming is using a group profile such as Digicel to access other Digicel properties. By using a Digicel IMSI to access other Digicel properties, you can ensure long-term sustainable connectivity for your IoT projects. The second type of access we offer is local profiles. This is for countries like Brazil, China, and Turkey, where IoT roaming is prohibited by regulation. When mobile network operators connect to Telnet's connectivity hub, we enable the exchange of IMSIs to comply with roaming agreements as well as local regulation. Today, Telnet has more than 22 IMSIs from mobile network operators on its hub, and this continues to grow as Telnet's technology enables the mediation for localization between IoT platforms. Our technology allows for the mediation between mobile network operators at the signaling level and acts as a clearinghouse for IMSIs. This enables localization of EURCC profiles without having to do heavy API integrations with mobile network operators. There are multiple IoT platforms that allow the trading of profiles within them. What Telnet does differently is providing interoperability between these platforms without changing the core infrastructure or billing system. So if you're using an Ericsson DCP platform and you need to access a mobile network operator that is using a Jaspers platform, Telnet mediates these platforms at the signaling layer to harmonize the management without any changes to the core network or IoT platform. By connecting to the hub, mobile network operators unlock the ability to enable their roaming partners to send IoT traffic transparently. We enable our hub members to have direct commercial agreements with each other. We simply act as a technical clearinghouse to enable this. Mobile network operators require the ability to simplify business operations for their customers through centralized management of IoT devices, no matter where in the world they are deployed. Telnet gives mobile network operators complete control over devices, profiles, and configurations through their native connectivity management platform, thereby enabling global IoT deployments through a single pane of glass. The coin phrase for 2021 will be single pane of glass management. In addition to providing mobile network operators with the ability to provide sustainable global connectivity for EURCC, Telnet also provides a fully managed cellular IoT platform that is OpEx-based and reduces your time to market. We are all weathering the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Cellular IoT will be broadly adopted after this crisis. Thanks again for your time, and I hope to see you all soon.
Okay, thank you, Greg. That was very insightful. Now, Marco Beefkits from Car Wireless will introduce himself and have a look at what's happening in the healthcare segment. Okay, over to you, Marco.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well in these times. I'm glad to share some of the latest insights that we have of the impact of COVID on IoT, and then especially for the healthcare space. Quick introduction on Core, who doesn't know Core. So Core actually deploys, manages, scales IoT solutions for our customers. So we do that through a number of services, including connectivity services and solutions, and we bring those solutions to the market with a number of partners. We're focusing on a number of verticals, and one of the key verticals that we're focusing on is the healthcare space, also through the recent acquisition of Integram. So if you look at the impact of COVID on our IoT, I think we all agree that it has accelerated quite a bit, because everybody now truly realizes what the importance is of digitization to the business and to society. There's no way of denying it anymore. And COVID is clearly accelerating that adoption that was expected quite a while back already. That holds true for different areas, but especially for the healthcare space, as will be obvious given the nature of the COVID disease. And interestingly, there's some recent insights that we've gained on COVID that has been done, studies that have been done, how IoT can be used for coping with pandemics like COVID. If you look at the healthcare growth, let's have a look at the IoT healthcare growth over the next few years. It is expected to grow at a rate of over 25% at an annual growth rate. So those are tremendous numbers, growing from $55 billion in 2019 to $188 billion by 2024. That is mostly driven by a number of parameters. Active patient engagement is one. We see more patient-centric care coming up, with more channels being available for solution distribution. And obviously also cost control measures are stimulating the adoption of IoT healthcare, and COVID will clearly accelerate this adoption. So in the context of COVID, IoT healthcare is very relevant. And many experts actually say that effective testing and contact tracing are the two things that should be in place ASAP to cope with situations like COVID. For example, if you look at early data, it suggests that people's breathing speeds will change during the incubation period, which obviously means that we need to be able to measure the breathing speed of people, which in its turn means that we have to be able to connect to a human's body and measure it, and IoT healthcare is actually providing solutions for that. If you combine that with geographical data, recent research has shown as well that we can, by overlaying geographical information with that, let's say, measurements that is done on the human body, we can actually search for patient zero, and we can identify the people who have come in contact with the infected patients. Very important to fight, let's say, a next pandemic if that were to be happening. So how is CORE helping in that area? So we're empowering healthcare and life science with patients through basically three capabilities. We streamline implementation. The IoT ecosystem is a complex one that certainly holds true for the healthcare space, and our services are aimed at reducing complexity by the implementation of solutions with our customers and just to avoid any barriers to adoption. Compliance in the healthcare space is extremely important. There are regulations that you have to comply to, very strict regulations, and you have to make sure that you stay compliant through the lifetime of the device in different areas of the solution, including information security. Of course, the devices have to stay connected, making sure that you're able to monitor patients remotely, and tracking employees is important for the solution, and obviously coverage and reliability of the cellular connectivity is key in that. So what kind of solutions do we then bring to market with our partners? Just to give a few examples, we've got medical wearable devices where, for example, insulin pumps can be monitored and adjusted wirelessly, which gives patients more control and better care. We've got pacemakers that actually can be monitored remotely, and even we can interact with the pacemakers and change heart rhythms. We do clinical trials, and for which we have an example right now, a very interesting example. So right now we're participating with a partner in a clinical trial where we have a trial of over 500 participants in EU countries, where we measure through a T-shirt that has sensors in it a number of metrics related to the human body that could indicate COVID. So, for example, we measure respiration, we measure body temperature, and by collecting that data through that T-shirt and collecting that through a mobile phone, which is with the patients, providing that data to a platform, and then through cellular connectivity, bringing that to a central hub, we can actually, together with our partner, kind of predict the situation that the patients are in, and we can actually take preventive measures if that were to be needed. So this is a very interesting example of COVID-related situations that we're currently working on, and which we have been doing before COVID, but now truly are taking off during COVID times. So that's something that we're working on right now with our partners, and where we provide the solutions together with our partner to the customers. So in that solution, cellular connectivity will remain key. We do believe that cellular connectivity is key because the reliability, and in these solutions you need to be able to rely on the solutions on a daily basis 100%. So the quality of service is key here, and as CORE we rely on cellular connectivity, including eSIM solutions for multiple network coverage globally. I think this covers my piece. Thank you very much for your attention. If you want to have any more information, please reach out. Glad to talk you to some of the more details on the solution that I just explained.
CEO of Arkia. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, everyone. I want to thank first Greg and Kaleido for inviting me to this webinar, and congratulations to Kaleido for the insights we just saw. So just a quick introduction about Datora and Arkia. We have 27 years in the telecom and tech operations. We were the first company to bring voice over IP to Latin America. We have global presence. We were the first MVNO in Brazil 10 years ago. Since 2013, we established an M2M and an IoT, and now we are a LATAM's reference in this market. In 2019, we completed a rebranding project with the launch of our new brand named Arkia for our mobile business. Also have an MVNE operation that certifies companies that want to launch an MVNO business in Brazil as a service. And in 2019, we opened our office in San Francisco to be closer to our IoT international customer base. So Arca, as I mentioned, is our MVNO focused on M2M and IoT, and we have more than 1 million devices connected. We try to help international companies to operate and provide services in Brazil and Latam. I like this note from the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. We saw 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. I think everybody agree on that. And from our perspective, and aligned with the insights generated by the white paper, due to the COVID, the cellular IoT connection tend to accelerate the digitalization projects and open new opportunities for IoT companies. As you can see in the graph, we expect 25% more connections in Latam. Before COVID, as an example, we were expecting 90 million device connected in 2024, and now the same amount we are going to expect in 2022. So 2 years before. The main logic is that companies will start IoT projects focused on automating process and reducing cost. And in the second stage, we check out the power of IoT and also creating new revenue sources. As we notice in the report, mobility it's increasing a lot, and it's going to increase even more. Remote work will be a trend, and IoT will be a way to connect people and machines, even giving more security to the companies. Also, we cannot forget about homeschooling. In Brazil, we are already seeing an increase of homeschooling, and we think that this is something that is gonna stay forever, and it will grow for a long time. So, and also companies that work with data and technology are already seeing a peak of usage and will increase even more. Another sector that, in our opinion, will be a protagonist will be the logistics. Companies that will connect more and more their operations. Fleet management and cargo monitoring will be critical, and more analytical insights generated by data will be created. Some sectors that before COVID were not prioritizing IoT, such as retailers, are starting to connect devices. In Brazil, for example, a very small example, small supermarkets started to add connectivity into their air conditioning to monitor the devices. Very simple, very small example that shows that new potential IoT customers for everybody. As we saw the healthcare segment, as mentioned before, we have a mindset transformation. The growing need for medical assistance raised several possibilities for IoT. Telemedicine, remote consultations, patient monitoring, and assistance via robots that were once a resistance are now a reality. In Brazil, the regulator before COVID didn't allow virtual consultations, and now we see a lot of them. It's like a forced transformation, and this is everything impacting mobility. We just saw in the report that bike increased a lot in China after COVID. Sharing mobility will grow a lot, a way to avoid public transportation, to keep social distancing. In Brazil, we provide services to the largest bike sharing company, and of course now they are suffering because of all the pandemic crisis. But we are sure that after the pandemic, we are going to see a lot of growth into the sector. We cannot forget about agribusiness. Is another sector that is starting to see IoT. In Brazil, they were not hurt by COVID. On the contrary, they are increasing and need to be more and more efficient. Summing up, companies will need to be more efficient, reducing costs and automating a lot of process. We strongly believe that IoT will bring increasing a lot in the short and midterm. Thank you very much. Back to you, Stephen.
Great. Thank you very much, Thomas. And now, last but not least, John Candish, representing SAP. Over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Stefan. We at SAP are about helping the world run better, and supply chains are certainly a big part of that. We've all seen the stories in the press about a shortage of various items, whether it be loo roll or vital medical equipment. Much of what we need to live in modern life is dependent on supply chains, and the current pandemic is severely testing these supply chains. It's perhaps worth elaborating what we mean by a supply chain. It's what happens between extracting raw materials and harvesting food, through to the manufacturing of that into a useful product or food, and distributing the end result to the consumer. Just about everything we purchase is dependent on a network of complex supply chains these days. To be successful, enterprises have to manage not just uncertain supplies, but also highly volatile and shifting demands. All this is made much harder in the context of today's pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic also increases the challenge of protecting people, managing the effective use of human resources, whilst also ensuring that people are kept safe is paramount to any supply chain. Resilient supply chains are only as good as the information used to design and operate them. And that good information is dependent on being connected to everyone, everything, and everywhere in a reliable fashion. So IoT has got a big role to play in enabling the good information necessary for a resilient supply chain. This slide highlights some of the areas of vulnerabilities in any supply chain. At the start of the process, the availability of raw materials or components must be tightly managed. And we've got many IoT customers and enterprises who are using it to good effect to monitor in real time, for instance, the mining of a more raw material, or the inputs to and subsequent harvesting of a crop, and shipping of components from the supplier onward to a manufacturer or retail outlet. Inventories in the past have been managed often on a weekly or even monthly basis. Manufacturers who've embraced automation have been able to use IoT to monitor component stocks in real time. As a result, we're seeing manufacturers able to balance their supplies on a daily or even hourly basis. Jumping forward on the slide to demand, understanding customer demand has become much more complex in the context of this pandemic. We've seen the demand for many items fall, while basics like flour and essential equipment such as ventilators are in short supply. As people eventually return to work and education, the demand patterns will change significantly again. Here again, IoT has been successfully deployed in warehouses and shops to monitor the consumption of goods in real time. And critically, this enables the organizations who've automated their supply chains to balance the supply of raw materials and components on a daily basis as the demand changes. We've also seen manufacturers switching to produce different products as a result of the pandemic. Here in the UK, brewers have been producing hand gel rather than beer. And in many countries, clothing manufacturers are now producing personal protective equipment. For those that have digitized their supply chains, shifting between producing their regular product and new products, and probably more critically, managing that change back again, will be much easier. They'll have that agility that's really essential in these uncertain times. Employee risk and safety was always a fundamental part of any well-managed supply chain. And clearly the COVID pandemic has made this a much bigger topic. IoT can be used here to reduce the amount of human-to-human contact, automating the monitoring of systems and processes. It can also be used, as it is already in the mining and extraction industries, to ensure environmental safety. Managing the physical proximity of people and keeping that controlled and clearly trackable is another area IoT can be used for good effect. So just in summary, we're seeing, I think, in all countries, some companies are scrambling. And those that have been reliant on a single geography or a single supplier for products, and critically don't have the visibility across the extended supply network to understand their inventory status, to optimize production, project future demand, and manage their logistics on a daily basis. Whereas others are much better prepared to mitigate the impact of COVID and respond to the event, developing and implementing supply chain risk management and business continuity strategies, diversifying their supply chains from a geographic perspective to reduce the supply side risks, using a multi-source of key commodities or strategic components, and having the ability to move between those different sources in an agile manner as required, and being able to optimize the management of their inventories. And common across all of these, we're seeing the use of well-connected IoT solutions to underpin all of these approaches with the good information that all enterprises need in order to make good decisions. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John, for that insight, and to all of the attendees for joining today's webinar. So thank you again for all your comment and all your thoughts. Unfortunately, in terms of the timing, we've surpassed the allotted time that we had today for any questions. Please be assured that any questions that you have inputted into the chat will be addressed directly by us after the event. So just one last point in closing, as mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. So we're going to see today the launch of a new white paper looking into the impact of COVID-19. So it will expand on many of the points that were brought up today, specifically looking into the impact of cellular IoT within the context of the verticals and the business cases that we've looked at today. So all participants who attended today will receive a copy alongside a copy of this presentation. So without further ado, to close this event out, many thanks again for your time, and of course, all of you, please stay well in these uncertain times. Thank you very much.